Class. My name is Ms. Shaw, and today I'm going to be talking about the French Revolution. My presentation will last approximately 5 minutes, and should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask me at the end. So, the French Revolution started 1789 to 1794. However, there were a number of events that happened prior to this that acted as catalysts towards the French Revolution. We can see a lot of similarities between this revolution and others, like the American. And if we go back to Britain Crane's list of 10 motives that result in a revolution, you can see a number of similarities. For me, though, the most important motives were economic, political, and social. Economic was concerned with Louis' inability to control their finances, leading to bankruptcy of the country. The political was concerned more of a historic with the absolute monarchy, and the social was to do with the social class, the three-level estates, and the inequality and oppression of people. Going back to my first cause, my first motive being economic, it relates to Crane's number 10, where the government could not organise their finances correctly. Now, this was largely due to the luxurious spending of Louis XVI and his wife Antoinette. They lived just outside of Paris, so they were quite isolated in the Palace of Versailles. Here, they spent unwisely, and they weren't in touch with the people. And there's a famous saying, when the people were starving because they didn't have bread, Antoinette said, "Give them cake." They spent unwisely, and the country was in debt due to war. The evidence we have of this happened in the 18th century, and by 1770s we saw much of Europe colonised. French had supported this, especially in 1778, with them backing the American against the British. In order to solve this, Louis XVI decided to raise taxes, but unfairly, inadequately. Most of the nobles were exempt from taxes, therefore leaving the largest population, which was the middle class or the third estate, and the farmers and the skilled labour, having to pay for those taxes. There's a famous poster at this time where you see a French peasant carrying on his back, piggybacking, nobles and the clergy from the church. This unfair system of taxes created much anger, and it therefore didn't even help solve the solution of the economic crisis. So in 1787, the outcome was for Louis to call the Assembly of Nobles to try and address the financial crisis that was happening. His idea was to tax the nobles, getting some money. However, it was unsuccessful. Louis XVI was often regarded as a weak leader and backed down from many of his decisions. The nobles were up in arms about having to pay taxes, so he withdrew. And we saw at the end of the Assembly of Nobles. This resulted, the outcome of this was that the people, the majority of the Third Estate, which accounted for 97% of the population, angry. They had lost total confidence now in their king. People began to riot in the streets, and the revolution had begun. So much so that by 1789, Louis had lost control, and therefore gave up power to Gilbert Monter to control the law and order. Now, he was in support of the revolution, and interestingly, as the revolutionaries were counted as Reds, he added the colour to what we know as the tricolour flag today. My second cause relates to the political situation of the country. If we go to Crane's list, number 2, it says people feel restless and held down by unacceptable restrictions in society, religion and government. The French at this time were ruled for centuries by a regime of monarchy, aristocrats and the church. Louis XVI believed he had divine right. So he had absolute monarchy and what his wants and decisions stood. He was in power from 1774 to 1792. However, and this is your method, with the Age of Enlightenment, which questioned tradition and the faith using science, the emphasis was placed on the freedom of thought and speech, that everybody should be equal. The right of the king to rule for the first time was really questioned, as well as the church's wealth and their influence in running the country. The outcome led to a government. 3 parties, with the right being royalists and wanting a constitutional monarchy, the left being what we can regard as radicals, wanting everything to change, and then you had the middle, the National Party, which really wanted to focus on writing a new constitution for the country. Did this work? Well, it kind of got ruined because of a number of factors. My last is social. Crane number 4. People are beginning to think themselves as belonging to a social class, and there is a growing bitterness between social classes. This is evident with a 3-estate system. The first was clergy, which accounted for about 1% of the population. The second, of about 2%, were the nobles. And the third estate, consisting of professionals, middle class, farmers, skilled labour, accounted for 97. There was a huge divide between the third estate and the first and the second. There was a mass inequality and, as I've already mentioned, the high taxes. You had people starving in the third estate. Now, this was also due to environmental factors. They had their worst winter in 90 years, which limited the supply of wheat and saw high prices, inflation. So much so that a piece of bread went from 9 to 16 source, which is the currency at the time, and that was equivalent to about a month's wages. So people were angry, people were starving. The government was unable to control them. Many of the top generals were of a higher class, and therefore were unable to control the soldiers from the middle class, from the working class, from the third estate. So without an army, again, people rioted, and that was the outcome. So I've now looked at the 3 main causes. As I said at the beginning, there were many similarities to other revolutions, like the Greek, where you had a class system, and there were an inequality of taxes and oppression, where they had to send money back to the motherland, as well as other similarities. Thank you very much for listening, and should you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Thank you.